except for you.
All right, good afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. Vermonter and all the canoes on the Connecticut. This is the Senate Institutions Committee. We are here to talk about some general introductions of folks who are going to be players in the conversation as we move forward. I'm just going to remind anybody who is watching us either directly through the Zoom link or on YouTube that this is technically a family-oriented channel. And while we understand people would like to make comments and make observations in this heated time, I'm just going to remind you that there are others who may be accessing this screen at some point in time, but welcome to everybody. I'm Joe Benning. I'm the chair of the committee. We have Senators McCormick, Mazza, Parent, and Ingalls. We also have several witnesses who will be talking with us this afternoon. The first name on my schedule is our treasurer, Beth Pierce, and I am assuming that one of the other folks on the screen is going to hop up and say that Beth can't make it here today and somebody else is going to take over the conversation. Am I safe in that assumption?
Good afternoon, Senator Benning. This is Ashlyn Doyon, Policy Director in the Treasurer's Office. We have Scott Baker and Will Grewald here from the Treasurer's Office. They're going to get the testimony started. The Treasurer will be here shortly. She's just jumping from another meeting.
Very good. Thank you, Ashlyn. Scott, would you like to begin? First, let me tell you that this group, this committee, consists of 3 new members. So when each of you weighs in, we'd appreciate it if you'd give us a little bit of a background on yourself, and then we'll let you go from there.
Okay, sure. Scott Baker from the State Treasurer's Office. I am the Director of Financial Reporting, also work on the debt management. So when the state issues bonds, I'm kind of on that side of it. Also, Will Grewald is with us as well. He's our Chief Financial Officer, so he helps out in that process as well. So we're just kind of go through kind of a quick overview of the capital financing process, if that's okay.
That'd be great.
Okay. Can we share the slide deck or?
I don't know how to do that from my end. In fact, I can't do that from my end. So if you've provided a slide for the committee assistant or for Peggy Delaney, who's also here, I'm assuming one of them has that capability.
Denise, can you, if we make you the host, could you share it with that co-host? Could you share it? Was it William that was speaking?
No, that was Scott who was speaking.
Oh, Scott, if we make you the co-host, could you share it? Do you know how to do that, or do you want us to do it?
It would probably, this is Will. It'd probably be preferable if you or Denise could share it, just because the way that Scott and I have to connect is we actually remote into it's a very complicated thing, but we're on 2 different computers at one point. One for the Zoom call and one for our Treasurer's Office stuff. If not, Ashlyn Doyon, I think, can be able to share her screen with the deck if need be.
Yep, give me 10 seconds and I can pull it right up.
So Denise, can you make Ashlyn the co-host?
I can.
Ah, the wonders of modern technology.
Okay, I'm ready to share, and here we go. And there you go. Can you see what you need, Scott? Will?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Okay,
Great.
want to go to the first slide? Sure, great. So just kind of a quick overall view of the debt strategy for the state. The state has reduced the amount of outstanding debt since the 90s. However, the national trend for the 50 states is that there's been an overall reduction in debt issuance. So we've kind of been following that path. We'll get into it. We'll show you some charts that kind of prove that out in the future. More and more states are going to PAYGO funding to to pay for their infrastructure projects rather than bonding for it. The state's debt is pretty simple. It's uncomplicated, just straightforward, 100% fixed rate debt. Pretty much everything that we issue are general obligation bonds. We do have a small amount of transportation infrastructure bonds that were issued between 2010 and 13. There was a total of, $36 million of those issued. Those are special revenue bonds. The debt service is paid from the motor fuel assessment collections. Again, that's a pretty small piece of it. There's about $23 million of debt outstanding for that. Everything
Scott?
else that we do. Yes, I'm sorry.
Scott, can I just ask you, a couple of us have served on this committee, so we're aware of what you're talking about, but I'm thinking that there's a very wide audience out there who may not understand basic terminology. So it would be helpful if you are describing, for instance, fixed rate bonds, to just give a brief explanation about what that means. And especially for our newest member, to learn this vocabulary is very important.
Sure. Okay. Sure. So what the state issues is general obligation debt, and that means that it's the full faith and credit of the state behind it, and basically any available money any cash is available to pay that debt. So bondholders are relying on any amount of money, whereas the transportation infrastructure bonds, the TIBs, where those are called special revenue bonds, the motor fuel assessment collections that are taken in, those go into a pool, and only those revenues are available to pay those bonds. So if there weren't enough collections, for example, the state, the state's general fund is not responsible to pay those. It's only from those particular revenues.
Senator Benning, this is Beth Pierce. I'm sorry, I was on the other link waiting for folks to start, and then realized I should be here. I'm going to let Scott, he's doing a great job, continue on, but I did want to talk about that question a little bit. In a fixed rate bond, you go out to bid and you get a rate. You get a rate of 2%, you get a rate of 2.5%, or whatever it might be. In a variable rate bond, it's going to be linked to the market. In other words, LIBOR, which is going away, but or other money market indices. And what that does is, it may go up or may go down. For instance, Vita has a lot of variable rate debt when they go out, and one of the reasons they like dealing with us. When we gave them some borrowing capacity from us, not bonds, but through our investments, is that it was fixed rate, and that was more appealing to people. But I'll leave it at that. Scott had a lot of experience over at VHFA about variable rate bonds and some of the market disruptions that happened in 2008 that made that very difficult. And that's one of the reasons we hired him, because he was smart enough to figure out a way to get out of that. So.
Well, Madam Treasurer, welcome aboard. And let me just pause again to say that when I first came onto this committee 10 years ago, a lot of this terminology was thrown about the room as if everybody in the room knew exactly what you guys were talking about.
Yep.
And I always felt like I was 10 miles behind. Now, with the Zoom capability of this committee discussion going out live to the public, I am sure there are many, many, many more people, all two of whom are probably watching right now, that would love to have that basic 10,000-foot level of what this vocabulary is all about. So I appreciate, Scott, how you're proceeding with that conversation.
Okay, so I'll let Scott continue on, and I'll give some comments at the end. But again, Scott's work in this has been a long time, and he understands it. And Mr. Senator Benning, I would say that whatever you had to learn in the past, you're 10 miles ahead now. So thank you very much for all the good work and the time you spent on this. And I'll let Scott continue.
Okay, so the state's debt is also, it's a level principle. So when we issue, let's say we issued $100 million of bonds, those are 20-year bonds. So we have an equal payment $5 million maturing each year for 20 years. So that's what level principal payment means. What it amounts to is rapid amortization. That's something the rating agencies look at. So even though they may be a 20-year bond, between the bonds that are already outstanding and the new issues, it's paying down at a very quick rate. At this point, 93% of our bond issues will be paid off in 15 years, 73% within 10 years. So when you add in all the existing debt and the new debt, a lot of it's upfront, paying off pretty quickly, and that's something the rating agencies look at. We'll talk about a couple of the changes that has been implemented in the past few years have really helped out. One is going to a 2-year recommendation. So the Capital Debt Affordability Advisory Committee, which we'll talk about in a few moments, but comes up with a debt recommendation for the governor and the legislature to issue. Up until fiscal year 2013, they would meet every year and come up with a 1-year recommendation level. Starting in 2013, that was switched to a recommendation for the biennium, and that helps in the planning process. So when they're looking at capital projects, they can kind of look at it on a 2-year horizon and maybe move the money around as depending on when the projects will be funded. So that has helped in a lot of the planning.
Scott, let me just jump in for our new members and say what you folks need to know is that the bill we'll be working on is actually going to be covering the next 2 years, not just one.
Right. Yes, thank you. One other change that is fairly recent is the use of the bond premium. So when the state issues debt, in the recent past, interest rates have been very low. The last bond issue that we did was in August of 2019, and the all-in interest cost, true interest cost, was just over 2%. I think it was 2.10%. So very, very low. And again, all of those bonds are maturing between 1 and 20 years. So that even the 1 year, like under 1%, very, very low. But the bondholders out there when they're tying up their money, they want a higher interest rate. So what will happen is, even though they may be buying a $5,000 bond, they don't want that low of an interest rate. So they're willing to pay us, $1,100. For a $5,000 bond, they may be paying $5,200 and get a 5% interest rate. So we're paying them more interest, but we're getting more money up front. What that does is allows us to reduce the amount of bonds that we issue. So for instance, in the last bond issue, we needed $100 million of project money. Because of the premium, we raised an $11 million premium, so we only issued $89 million of par amount of bonds, received that premium of $11 million, so we had $100 million of project funds. So even though there's a higher interest rate, the yield comes out the same, so it benefits us. Up until a few years ago, we had to use that premium to pay debt service in the first year. The statute was changed beginning in FY 2013, which allows us to use that premium for project funds. So when we do that, it frees up additional bonds authorized to issue. So that helps out in your case. And you'll see in the capital bill, after a bond issue, generally that bond premium goes back in and is included in the capital bill for authorized bonds to issue. You'll see that.
Yeah, so if I could comment a little bit on that, that was a little work we did with, as I mentioned his name, I get a little sad, but Jim Reardon. And, we used to use it for debt service, would essentially reduce the general fund appropriation. But it was impacting the amount of money that you had for capital projects. So we're pushing that into there. It also created some IRS problems. You had to do it right away. There were some rules around it. So putting it into bond premium seemed to make more sense. one of the things we're talking about is maybe using that instead of putting it in the bonds, using that to create a pay-go reserve fund so that we can do things without borrowing and, you know, have some money aside that we could do projects without the interest cost associated with it.
All right, next slide, Ashley, please. So we briefly mentioned that CDAC, or the Capital Debt Affordability Advisory Committee, and this is a committee. It's made up of 8 members: the state treasurer, who serves as the chair of the committee, as well as the Secretary of Administration, a representative from the Vermont Bond Bank, 2 appointees, 2 governor appointees, 1 treasurer appointee, the legislative economist, and the state auditor, who is a non-voting member. So those 8 members of the committee meet on an annual basis and issue a report, which is on our website. We can give you the link if you'd like to see it. And what they do is they look at a number of different things, specifically some debt metrics, which we'll talk about in a minute, and come up with a recommendation for the governor and the legislature of the amount that they think can be prudently issued for the biennium. And again, this is the first year of the 2022-23 biennium. So we'll talk about that. Some of the metrics that they look at are the 3 main ones are debt as a percentage of personal income, which kind of shows, it's kind of indicative of what, you know, how much it costs the taxpayer, what they can afford as a percentage of their personal income. The second one, debt service as a percentage of revenues, kind of relates to the state revenue and what's affordable for the state. The third main one is debt per capita, basically how much debt per person in the state. That one is a little, not that it's not important, but I think the committee relies on that a little bit less, only because right now, when you look at the scenarios, they're oftentimes the debt levels that we're at, we're out of compliance with the debt per capita guidelines that we're shooting for. And again, we're trying to benchmark these to the peer AAA rated states. Up until a couple years ago, the state had 2 AAA ratings. Now we've lost those in the last couple of years. We'll talk about that in a minute, but we still try to benchmark these ratios to the other AAA rated states. The recommendation is just that. It's an advisory recommendation to the governor and the legislature, although they've always abided by that recommendation. They've never gone against what that amount was. The rating agencies give us a lot of credit for that, basically working together, having a good system in place to really examine what we think is affordable for the state. And so that really helps in the credit ratings. The other thing is the CDAC looks at not only they look at total net tax supported debt of the state. What that is made up of, not only the general obligation debt of the state, which we talked about earlier, that's the main bond issuance of the state, which the capital bill is all general obligation debt. But there's also other net tax supported debt of the state, including the property transfer tax bonds or the housing bonds, and what they call moral obligation of the state. This is debt issued by the Vermont Municipal Bond Bank, Vermont Housing Finance Agency, Vermont Student Assistance Corp. Some of the debt that they have issued has the moral obligation of the state. The state is not on the hook to pay that, although if there's a deficiency in their reserve fund or they're not able to pay, the state has the moral obligation to pay it. It's not required, but the state will probably back it up, is my guess. So that's all part of what CDAC looks at. Okay, the next page, please. So again, as a result of other states kind of tapering down on the amount of debt that they're issuing, Vermont's debt ratios have weakened slightly. You'll see in the charts in a couple of pages will demonstrate that. This is the first year of the biennium, so the 2022-23 recommendation. CDAC has reviewed that and basically recommending the same amount of issuance for this biennium as the previous of 123,180,000.
So Scott, I need to stop you here for a second.
Mhm.
We were very clearly under the impression a year ago that we would probably have about $20 million less than what this calls for. And as a result, went through most of last session's conversations with witnesses, telling virtually all of them that they should expect a much more difficult time in front of our committee. This is basically now telling us that, well, it's kind of like saying, oh, never mind, we were wrong. But I'm trying to get to the bottom of why exactly the decision has been made to keep it at what was virtually the same as the last go around.
I'm going to try to respond to that, Senator. The big answer is COVID. We took a look at where we were, and we've had a 23% reduction since 2014-15, as you see in the next line. And I believe that we need to reduce our appetite for debt and lower the credit card. We see that at home, you're trying to do that. You try to limit that, at least I hope you do. And so we think that's very important. This year with COVID, we wanted to make sure, so we made the decision to leave it at 123 million. That said, we also said we would review it as we move forward. So there may be some change in terms of the biennium, the second half. We could take a look at it. But our concern was that under these extraordinary conditions, it was not the time to take another step of reduction. We're on that same path. We're going to continue to take a look, as we move forward. Again, I think that it's very important to lower your appetite for debt. In addition to that, we want to look at what we call pay-go opportunities, doing it with appropriations rather than debt. This morning I was talking to Scott, and we talked about the housing bond, for instance, and the interest rate on that was very good, but the amount of interest on that borrowing was 28% of the total. And similar to, we get 25 to 30. If I'm misspeaking on that, Scott, let me know. I'd rather not pay interest. I would rather, pay with cheaper financing, i.e. the current appropriations. And that's what we're seeing. States are tightening their belts, and they're also doing more pay-go. And we think that's a better method to go, and maybe use some of that bond premium to start a fund to assist with that. So we're going to be looking at that as well, and find ways to lower that. Yes.
Okay, so a couple of months ago, I first saw this figure, and I know that the administration has it. Have you received any feedback from the administration that they've decided to start with this number?
They have, Suzanne Young is a member of the committee. Brad Ferlin, who's now retired, the deputy secretary, was involved in these as well. So we think we're comfortable with this as their starting point. And again, there are a couple of pieces that change that. The bond premium, if there is any, and I don't believe now that it's been a while since we issued one, Scott, so if I'm wrong, there won't be any of that. But we also have recycled projects. We started this process back in 12 or 13 that we looked at some old projects, and you had projects from 1991 that had residual dollars, and we said capture those dollars and recycle them. And then you took a step forward, the committee, to say that that's also hold the line on this happening again. So when folks don't use their money within a 2-year period, you bring them in and you put them through the grilling on why, and just make determinations whether or not you stay with that or you make some changes in the amount that they have. So I think we're moving in the right direction. We did put a hold right now. I think that was I won't say unanimous, but I'm not sure, but a predominant view of the administration, myself, the administration's representatives, and my representative on the committee. We felt very strongly that this is not the time to take that next step, but we are going to continue down that path.
Okay, I wanted to make sure I can let the walleye guys know that
Mhm.
they're okay to come back.
Okay, we would prefer that folks, again, remember that debt costs money. Folks think of it as a revenue. It's not. It's a financing tool. You're capturing future revenues, whether it's debt service or in the case of the housing bond, the property transfer tax. You're bringing it, forward to borrow, but you got to pay it back too. And that's the bottom line for us. I'll stop talking. I know that I get excited about these subjects, and I'll let the presentation continue.
Well, we know how to mute you now.
There you go. There you
All
go.
right, thank you. Scott, you're back.
Okay, so just a couple other comments that are contained in the CDAC report. Recommendations from CDAC, just the need to remain disciplined in meeting the actuarially determined employer contributions each year on the pension funds. The rating agencies look at the long-term liabilities. So basically the accrued liabilities on both the pension funds and the OPEBs, the post-employment benefit funds. So, and as well as a couple of years ago, the reserve funds were increased pretty well. So they're at a good level now, and basically want to encourage continuing that level. That's something the rating agencies really look at as well. Next page.
Can I ask a question, Joe?
Certainly, Senator Parent.
This actually kind of plays into it. So with our bond rating, I have a little bit of background in municipal bonds early in my career, and about 8-9 years ago when I stopped paying attention, we were trading, I don't know, 8-10 basis points behind some, we were a AAA state like a North Carolina or a Maryland.
Mhm.
With our downgrade, what kind of has our position been in comparison to those states?
So I'm going to try to answer that. We haven't seen, the downgrade that or the increase in expense that we thought we'd have. We've had some, but the reality is folks still view Vermont as good bonds. And part of that is because we have good financial management in this state, and that we have reserves. During the the COVID crisis here, a lot of states had liquidity problems, and you saw a shift in the rating agencies' discussions toward what is your liquidity, because they want you to get out, see what's after COVID, on the other side of this thing, and hopefully that's soon. But they also wanted to see what your liquidity and your management was to move to that. And because we have reserves, we're in better shape with that. So we've seen some decline, but not what we thought. And again, we haven't been in the market a lot. Our last bond issue was, Scott, 2019?
Correct, right.
Yeah.
August.
And, our cash flows haven't required that we do that. And we also don't want to draw down money and then to pay interest on it and not earn as much, as it in a bank. So negative arbitrage for your old days. And I apologize, Senator Benning, for saying that, but I think I defined it, money coming in and borrowing, and then you look and you say, the rate that I'm getting for it while it's in the bank isn't very good. So we tried to minimize and talk to the administration about cash flows. When are you actually going to need that money? And when's the project going to be, up and running and shovel ready? And try to time our entry into the market based on that.
Okay. Senator Parent, did you get your question answered, or do you have another question?
Yeah, I have another question too. have we looked, looking at the rate, just where rates are, and
Yeah.
I don't know what the long-term forecasts and everything is. Kind of pay attention to used to, but what's our typical duration on our debt, and are we looking to maybe extend that a little bit now that rate? I would assume the rate environment's low, and trying to get that cheap money for as long as possible,
Yeah.
especially if we're borrowing it at effectively below inflation rates.
I'm going to let Scott answer most of that. I would say that we have a statutory limit, I believe, of 20 years on a bond.
Right,
and-
that's correct.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you. And, Scott was talking a little bit earlier about our rapid amortization. And for folks, when we say amortization, we mean we're paying it down faster. And I'll let Scott answer any questions on that. I will respond to one thing, that when everybody says the interest rates are low, go bond more. I'm saying, you got to be careful about what's on your credit card. And, I'm very careful. Scott's very careful. Will Prewald, if he's on the call, our CFO, we want to make sure that we're conservative in our management of debt and not pile on, because you're still going to pay it back, and it's still 28, 25, 30% interest on that. And we want to try to be prudent in issuing that. And Scott, I know that you talked a little bit about pay downs. Maybe you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, you're right, though. There is a statutory requirement. We're required to issue 20-year bonds with level principal payments. So we are restricted in that way. So does that
Scott,
answer?
before you continue, I'm just curious, this document obviously on our screen now, but has it been turned into a paper copy?
We can send that to you.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, especially for the benefit of Senator Ingalls, this is a lot of information to try to digest at one time. And we would normally, if back at the State House, be able to ask for a copy and get one relatively quickly. But I would ask that you send a copy of the document, the complete document, to each member of the committee. It would be very helpful.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So there are 3 credit rating agencies that review the bonds and rate the state's bonds: Moody's, S&P, and Fitch. The highest rating for each of these is AAA, and that's our ultimate goal, is to be a AAA rated from all 3 rating agencies. Up until we were a AAA in Moody's and Fitch until fairly recently. Moody's downgraded the state in October 2018, and then in the following year, July of 19, Fitch downgraded from AAA to AA+. So S&P, we've been AA+ for a little while, although just in November of 2020, they affirmed the AA rating, but they also changed the outlook from stable to negative. So kind of a warning sign. It wasn't a downgrade, but it was just that kind of a warning that if certain things happen, we could be downgraded. So that's why it's more important as ever to kind of pay attention to a lot of this criteria that we're looking at. It is important to keep as high a rating as possible. Not only does it affect the interest rate that the state pays on the general obligation bonds, but it also affects the rates on the entities that issue the moral obligation bonds, like VSAC and the bond bank and VHFA. So it's important to keep their interest rates as low as possible as well. So the next page, so we have a few charts. So this one shows the amount of debt authorizations going back to 2000. So you'll see it's kind of risen, starting in 2001 was kind of the low point. If you go back even further, it is definitely dropping down. For example, if you looked at 1994, it was 64 million, kind of dropping from there, reached the low point of 2001. Since then, it continued to rise up into 2014 and 15. And then, as the treasurer mentioned earlier, it's been going down, and it's been a 23% drop since the 2014-15 recommendation. You see the last 2 years are a different color because that's the CDAC recommendation at this point. It's not an authorization until, the legislature authorizes that amount. Next page, next slide. So this shows the amount of debt outstanding for the state. As of June 30, 2020, there was about $613 million of general obligation debt outstanding. And you can see it's kind of risen since, over the last 12 years or so. The chart in the middle, the little inset graph shows the net tax supported debt for the 50 states. And you can see it's pretty much been level since 2010. So as the state's debt has continued to rise, that you'll see the other 50 states has pretty much been flat. And the blue line shows the actual year over year net tax supported growth. So it's actually negative the last couple of years. So you can see that other states have really, the amount of debt that they're issuing has declined. The next chart, this shows the amount of debt outstanding kind of adjusted for inflation. We've been asked to show this, comparatively. So it doesn't show it on the chart, but this uses the Bureau of Labor Statistics, CPIU, and I think it's in 1996 dollars, but basically just shows you the trend of the amount of debt outstanding adjusted for inflation. So it gives you a view of that. The next slide. So each year, Moody's puts out a report on the 50 states, the debt median reports, and they rank them. And this chart shows two of our metrics, the debt as a percentage of personal income and debt per capita, and where the state ranks among the 50 states. The goal here is to be number 50. So that's basically the lowest. So 50 is the best. You'll see in 2011, Vermont ranked very well, 36 and 37 in those two categories. And since then, it's slipped. See, as we mentioned earlier, our debt rankings have kind of weakened compared to the other 50 states, and this kind of shows that out here. Next page. And this shows the green line here shows the debt per capita for Vermont. The blue line shows the median for the 50 states, and you can see for quite a while we were well under the 50 state median in debt per capita, and now we're just slightly higher at $1,071 per capita versus the 50 state median of 1061. So you can see again that our metrics have weakened compared to the other 50 states. Next page. And again, this is the same thing. This is one of the other metrics, the debt as a percent of personal income. And it kind of shows the same thing, the green line of Vermont, where we were, well below the 50 state median. Now we're kind of right up against it. The gray bar shows the ranking. And again, in 2010, 11, 12, we were ranked 36. And now we're slipped down to 29. And again, 50 is the best. So you can see the state's ranking has slipped somewhat. Last page. So just kind of a summary. Some of the things that the main points that the rating agencies look at, the long-term liabilities, healthy reserves, and prudent debt management. So the CDAC kind of looks at this and is recommending that we continue to fund the actuarially determined employer contributions for the pension plans, maintain the healthy reserves, and again, continue following the CDAC recommendation as we get a lot of credit for having that process in place. So that's it for the presentation.
If it's okay, Senator, I'd like to make a couple of comments on it.
Sure.
Sure. So I think that, we've tried to hold the line, 23% reduction since 14-15. But other states are moving faster on that. And I think that there are two possibilities. One, they have deferred maintenance and they're saying, we're just not going to fix it, which isn't a good thing to do. But also, I think what we're seeing too is states are looking to be more innovative and do other models other than debt. We proposed some a few years ago. Actually, when I was a deputy treasurer, we presented a model on that. And we're seriously looking with the committee to try to come up with some other a model and get that to you so that we can start to move in that direction, I hope. Because again, I think it's better financing and move from there. We did have a reduction. The primary mode on our bond rating, the primary issue was demographics. And also how those demographics impacted your ability to pay your long-term liabilities, i.e. debt, pension, OPEBs. But the demographics were the lead on creating that issue. When we talked to one of the rating agencies this past year, because we had a update with every single rating agencies before December 31st. We hadn't gone out to the market for a while, and they're required to do this, I believe, every 2 years. So we had an update, and I will tell you that other states went through that, and there was a large number. We'll send that to you. Of I don't have it off the top of my head of states post-COVID that had a downgrade. Or a negative rating outlook, and then at least a couple that had a downgrade and still had a negative outlook. So we did fairly well in that process, holding our own. The concern that S&P has had for a long time is our demographics and our pensions. So we held our own in a period of time when other folks saw more adverse actions from the bond market, and I think that it's a credit to us that we had fully funded reserves. We were careful there, and our cash flows were and our cash management was in very good shape. So I think that was a piece. We have a stress this year that I want to make you aware of, which is a pretty large increase in our pension liabilities. Every 5 years, we go through what's called an experience study, take a look at our numbers, take a look at the assumptions that are used to do that. And it was a very sizable increase from the 2021 to what we would have. The 2020 VAL impacts the 2022 budget, just as the 19 impacted the 21 appropriation. And the numbers are mind-boggling. So here I go, about a $604 million increase between the state and the teachers in the unfunded liabilities, and $96 million increase in the amount of money that would need to be appropriated. We have every understanding that that's not going to hold and that's not going to happen. So we've implemented a process. It's kind of off of the process we did pre-COVID. We had a committee that was looking at it, a risk assessment. I would say two things happened with that. We got it done. We were getting to some progress, but then COVID got in the way. And frankly, we need to get it done faster so that you folks have time to look at it and make some changes. So March was a little late in the game. And I think we had too many people at the table as you're trying to do this. So we started.
Let me just say, Beth,
Yeah.
This is a conversation that is going to be very deep and very necessary.
Yep.
And I'm probably going to hold off this portion of the conversation for another day.
Okay.
But we are very much interested in that status and trying to put together witnesses and have our own questions formatted for that occasion is very important.
Okay.
We are still in introductory stage on this particular subject.
Okay.
And I don't know whether Scott or Will, Ashlyn, or you have any more comments about this particular document. But if you don't, I'm going to open it up to the committee to ask any questions that are necessary to deal with it.
Senator, if I could add just one more sentence about pensions.
Yep.
Okay, so what we've done is we will be filing a report on Friday make significant reductions in this and get back to a level. And we have recommendations that are painful, but we are looking at hundreds of millions of dollars of reductions in the pension plans and a significant reduction in the ADEC. And we will be bringing that to you. It will be presented on Friday. And I just wanted you to be aware that we're not sitting back and say, oh, well, you got to pay this. We are diligently working on a solution.
I appreciate that heads up, and I'm sure that if any members of the press are listening to this conversation, you've just given them a little bit to chew on as they walk away from it for now.
Yes.
But we do intend to have a more fuller discussion of this a little bit down the road.
Yeah.
Not hearing any other folks chiming in that there's still more to talk about with respect to this document. So I'm going to turn it over to senators to ask questions. Senator Ingalls, I saw your hand first.
Treasurer Pierce, I'm a trends guy. I kind of look at trends and kind of see, and it looks like our trends might be heading the wrong way. I mean, how do you see that? How do you see where we're headed versus where you'd like to be?
Okay. So again, we've done a 23% reduction. We're in the right path there. We are seeing some belt tightening in other places. And one of our concerns is some of that may be what I call deferred maintenance. I'm not going to fix that building and then the building crumbles around you. So I think we need to be diligent there. But my belief is that we need to reduce our appetite for debt. We're holding at this level, you know, as we get through the COVID crisis. But I think you're going to see that we're going to continue to be recommending lower levels of debt. And it takes a while to retire old debt. So when you look at those numbers, for a long time, we were issuing more debt than we were retiring. And I think we're getting close. If not, let Scott chime in if I'm wrong on that. But that's what we're trying to do, is make sure that we start retiring these dollars rather than the levels. To do that, you got to stop issuing more debt. And so we're working to lower those numbers. Our charts are just the most recent, because if we try to compress it all, you wouldn't. But if you went back to the 70s, 80s, and 90s, there was a lot of debt issuance, particularly if you look at it, the value of a dollar, the purchasing power in the 90s versus now. And we think that we're moving in the right direction. There's a lot of pressure. Folks are going to say to us, the interest rates are low, do more. And we don't think that's prudent. We think that at home, you're not going to just add to your credit card if you can pay for it in other ways. And that's where we are. And we also think that we need to be careful in terms of what our capital plan, and I commend the governor's staff for what they're doing there in terms of looking at long-term capital planning. And they've put together a much better infrastructure assessment tool as they move forward.
Thank
So
you.
Russ, did you have a follow-up question?
No, I'm good. No, I'm just listening. Yep. Thank you.
Senator Mazza.
Yeah, I know, Senator Benning, you said probably have the discussion later on, but the concern I have and continue to have is our biggest problem. One of the biggest problems is our pension with the teachers' retirement.
Mhm.
That's going to change going forward, but I haven't heard any solutions yet. And we keep getting deeper and deeper and deeper in debt. So I'm anxious to hear, is there going to be a solution of how
Yes.
we move forward? Because we're never going to get out of this mess if we continue to hold that kind of keep that commitment. I know it's a commitment for the existing teachers, but of the future, there's going to be a new plan. Otherwise, we're never going to come out of this.
Well,
I know you don't want to discuss that today, Joe. I thought
Yeah.
you said you wanted a later
Yeah.
date.
No,
That's fine.
I appreciated you leading it off with recognizing that I wanted to have this discussion later down the road.
Yeah, let's do it later.
I'm talking about next week, Dick,
Yeah,
not
okay.
any
that's
further
fine.
down the road. If this
Okay.
report's coming out on Friday, I want us to be able to get it and digest it and then have the open
That's fine.
discussion.
I just thought I'd bring it up. That's all. Thank you.
Okay.
Anybody else? Dick McCormick. You're muted, Dick.
you're still muted.
Yeah,
There you
no.
go.
It takes a second, yeah. Same disclaimer. I understand the chair wants to deal with this later, but just maybe the quick Cliff Notes version. How much are we essentially indebting ourselves to future expenses In other words, deferred maintenance, as an example, that maybe we're not borrowing the money, but we kind of are, because there's an expense we know we're gonna have.
Mhm.
And it would be cheaper if we fixed it now. I'm thinking about highway maintenance and so on.
So that was the idea behind the transportation infrastructure bonds. You know, if you let a bridge go down, you know, in terms of deferred maintenance, then it cost, you know, pay me now or pay me a heck of a lot more down the road. And so we
Yeah.
looked at.
Yeah.
The administration now has worked on coming up with a tool to take a look at these issues. That's not our role in this, you know, to take a look at that, but they are. And we're looking forward to the results of that. That takes a look at you know, the our assets in that area, and looking forward to a plan on that. So I think that's something that we're that's what we understand is coming from the administration, and I think that will be helpful to the process.
Any other questions from senators? All right, witnesses, well, thank you very much for coming out.
Thank
this
you.
afternoon. We will be speaking with you again in the not too distant future.
Yeah.
But thanks for coming for today.
Take a look at your inbox or the filed report on the 15th.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Committee members, this was the extent of the conversation I was intending to have this afternoon. And I'm going to officially close out the meeting unless anybody has any questions or comments, observations, whatever the case may be.
So you want the live stream to end now?
I do want the live stream to end, but Denise and Peggy, please don't leave me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very